The transfer portal window is in its final days, but that doesn't mean the Penn State Nittany Lions are done either recruiting high school or college players as the beat of the offseason marches on. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel from BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. It's the Wednesday, January 14th edition of BWI Live. T. Frank, we are now roughly 48 hours from the final day of the transfer portal. Obviously, it'll be a few more hours than that until things are buttoned up for Penn State and its players, but plenty of action over the last week and a half as the transfer portal has been open since January 2nd. We also continue to see Penn State coaching staff news be confirmed and become official, and there's obviously junior days and high school recruiting events on the horizon. So a lot to get to on today's show. How are we doing this morning, T. Frank?
Good. I also feel pretty good about like the where I sit today as opposed to 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago about knowing what this team is going to be, because during this time it's like it hasn't just been the players, it's also been getting to know what the team wants to do with that talent. And through the acquisition in the portal, we have a better idea of what they want to be on defense. They're bringing over their offensive staff, and I'm now getting to go back, and today I was starting to refine my understanding of the offense, of a broad sense of what they like to do, from like, here are the plays they run, here's what they did last year. Looks a lot like, Andy Kotelnicki's offense in a lot of different ways, but, fundamentally different in others. And then when you say fundamentally different in others, but I don't really have the words to express how and why, going in today and this week and trying to really dial in some of those things to understand the personality of the offense and how that projects to what they have on the field. So very interested to dig into that, but doing a lot of work on the defense this week and depth charts, all that stuff over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Been very productive, not just with player scouting on my end, but also like now we're getting into the fine details. And I enjoy feeling like the hay is in the barn. As a former fake farmer, I enjoy the feeling of having all the hay stacked and like, okay, that is done. And I feel confident about what's going on now.
Lots of new things to still get to with this Penn State football program as the rest of the month unfolds. Obviously, like we talked about, the portal will be hopping at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, the recruiting intel as well. Anything else we can gather for you, so it's a good time to remind you. Our transfer portal sale still going, 50% off. Join today. You get the Ultimate Fan Bundle with BWI, Rivals, and On3. 50% off a new annual membership. Also gets you a year to the Athletics, so check us out over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. T. Frank, let's go off script, buddy. I'm going to So that is, and I realize you got the audio taken care of there, that is the breaking news graphic if you're watching on YouTube, or the music if you're listening on the podcast version, or if you're just not paying attention to the screen. We got some news, T. Frank.
I'm flying blind on your face.
Yeah,
I'm totally going to be surprised by this. I love it.
Yeah, so an inside baseball fact for the listeners and the viewers is that I often leave too many tabs open, and that slows down the processing of my computer. And so I clicked over to X out the Blue White Illustrated tab for the time being and noticed a new story from BWI's Nate Bauer. So the Nittany Lions are now adding a kickoff specialist, T. Frank. Christiana Rosa from James Madison, a multi-year kickoff specialist for the Dukes. In 2025, he had 90 kickoffs and 62 touchbacks, which ranked 9th nationally in the FBS ranks. He was also the team's kickoff specialist in 2024 when he had 52 touchbacks. He will be a second-time transfer as he started his career at Central Connecticut, following an all-state kicking career at, looks like Central, I'm not sure what high school, Shelton High School in Shelton, Connecticut. So, obviously not coming here to take Ryan Barker's job, is coming to Penn State to replace Gabe Nwosu, who I thought for the most part did a very nice job as Penn State's kickoff specialist in 25. And there wasn't a really clear option on the roster, I didn't think, T. Frank, for his job, at least doing it the way he was able to do it in terms of just booming touchbacks endlessly. We know Barker has a big leg. We know that Matthew Parker, a second-year kicker from the York area, has a big leg. But if you don't have to worry about, certainly to let those guys compete, but if you have somebody who has proven at this level that they can boom touchbacks and force the other team deep, you might as well take it. It looks like Penn State has.
Yeah, I think that's an area where it's a really good point you're making there about the kickoff specialist. And Barker has a strong leg for a field goal kicker, but getting it into the end zone consistently. And then I'm not going to do an analysis of this, but I'm just curious if this guy is good at the directional kicking as well to try and pin teams deep and not just give them the 20 yards, from the touchback, but also like force them into some bad situations where you could start at the 10. Like some teams do still try to do that instead of just dropping it all the way down and like kicking it near like the coffin corner of the kickoff where it doesn't go out of bounds, it doesn't go in the end zone, and you have to do something with it. And so, like, I don't know, just kind of a question that popped into my head here. But interesting that they're adding, now we're focusing on the specialists and some of the things in the transfer portal. And this is something in the chat that Newhart says, feels like we have lost momentum in the portal / recruiting. It's a dead period, as we talked about yesterday on the show with Sean Fitz, where the AFCA meetings are going on right now. So everyone is convened for the summit of head coaches. And that is part of what you're feeling there, Newhart. We'll have more of that on the recruiting show and a little bit later on this show as well as to some of the things going on with the AFCA meetings. But putting in the middle of the portal, I mean, Greg, there's too many jokes to make about the calendar. There's too many instances where you go like, oh, well, that was dumb. And like, it's not even the dumbest thing about the portal because the national championship hasn't played yet. And like, we're going to talk about the portal days and the window opens for players that are going to be in the national championship game even beyond the 2 weeks that we've been in right now. And like how all of that plays into these things is just like, are you saving 5 spots in case somebody from Indiana wants to join Penn State? Are you keeping some of those spots open? And how do you handle like this tail that's on the transfer portal window? Like just all of this stuff is wildly disorganized intentionally almost,
Yes, it is a never-ending, best described as a never-ending cluster word that we can't say on YouTube. Not if we want to keep our family-friendly rating anyway, so we won't do that. But, it is a just fascinating puzzle to try and figure out. You are trying to not only make sure you have enough room available if somebody from one of those college football playoff finalists wants to come play for you, but also make sure you're not taking somebody who you otherwise would take on a hope and a whim that one of those guys would come and take the spot you're otherwise saving. So it's a balancing act. It's a puzzle piece. There's a lot of guys still in the portal, as we've talked about endlessly on this particular Wednesday show and all others here on the channel. More guys will go into the transfer portal than will come out of it. That's just a simple reality of the numbers. And so, there's opportunity. If you don't hit on all your top wants or top needs, there's opportunities to reevaluate guys and try to, fill some holes in the back end once that initial wave happens. And for Penn State, on the momentum thing, and I think the commenter did, realize that the convention was the reason that the news on that front has slowed down. Nobody can visit campus right now, high school or college recruits, so they can start doing that again tomorrow, which coincides with coaches being able to go on the road if they're so inclined to do so. And so I think you'll see, obviously, the news pick back up tomorrow. But, at the same time for Penn State, it was always going to be that rush of Iowa State guys. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. And obviously, we have seen some players from other schools, Frank, join the Iowa State contingent. But there was never any question that the largest group of incoming players were all going to come from Matt Campbell's old school. And so there was always the reality that you were guaranteed that one big wave, and then everything else was going to be maybe not a drip, but certainly a slower, steadier stream than the fire hose of all those Iowa State guys committing pretty much at the same time coming off their official visits.
Yeah, and it was like you had 2 sections of the portal. You had the Iowa State section of the portal, and they didn't take every player, And some people have been asking me on the message board about like X, Y, and Z player from Iowa State, and like not all of them fit because the system and the scheme at Iowa State, the defense they played specifically, as I'm talking about the defense, I don't think it lends itself to flexibility. Some of those players played really well within that system, but then if you say we want to do more, I have questions about whether those guys can do more. Now, some of those players came over to Penn State, and they will be in either different roles or they will be in more varied roles than they were last year. And so I'm interested to see how all of that fits together. But then you had to go into the real portal. You had to go into the actual transfer portal where there were players that you didn't coach before. And even then, because they brought in so many new coaches, they had a lot of connections to UCLA and USC. And I know they didn't get any USC players, but like they even dipped into those relationships as well. So it really was two different stories in the transfer portal. And I think the wins and losses in that section are really like the judge of what happened with this team building process. And for the most part, I think they did a very good job reshaping the team into a new image. Like, this is a different Penn State football team than it was under James Franklin from a philosophical approach, and something that, talking about next steps, I think that's kind of the big picture of what did they become in the last 2 weeks of building in the portal.
And whether or not it works out will obviously be a big way that this first year of the Matt Campbell era is judged, because you're right. I think Penn State fans, in some respect, are just looking at how James Franklin, and through no fault of their own, that's all any of us have known for the last 11 and a half years until James Franklin was let go, is how he built a program. So your comparison point, no matter how long you've been following Penn State football, is spam calls are firing on my phone this morning. But you only have that point of comparison, so it looks different and it feels different. I don't think there's any question about that, T. Frank. And some fans are not adjusting to that as quickly as others. Some are not buying into it as much as others. And, I can't blame anyone for and so we'll see how it all shakes out come the fall. We'll have a lot of time to talk about it all over the next winter months and spring months and summer months. But certainly it's definitely a different way of doing things than what Penn State fans have become accustomed to. Yeah,
and to that point, like in the modern era of college football, there is this now generational wash, right, of the Joe Paterno era people that lived the James Franklin era, and now we're into this Matt Campbell. I hate using eras and regimes and like things that make it sound like these are historical figures that are going to shape the course of history for everyone on the planet. But like, institutionally, like I just need better words. I hate the cliches. Anyway, under Matt Campbell, this is now a different approach to the modern era of college football. Penn State is only known in the modern era of college football, James Franklin's approach, but there are the fundamental aspects of how you build a team that are changing as well that I'm interested in seeing how the overlap and the dissimilarities. And I think that's the area where I'm talking to you about the article I'm writing in my head right now live on camera.
Right.
Is what's happening. Like, this is a really good idea, and I don't have it fully fleshed out yet, but I think there's some clear differences in the way the team has been built in the last couple of days.
Yes, there's no doubt about that, and look forward to reading that when you put it together over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. All right, let's get back to our originally planned rundown, starting with the news that another assistant coach hire is now official. We reported last week that Savion Huggins was going to join Matt Campbell's first Penn State staff after a pretty good stint at Boston College under Bill O'Brien. He's a former Rutgers running back who was interested in Penn State as a recruit, so he did not wind up in State College, but rather Piscataway as a player. Had a fairly decent career with the Scarlet Knights, went into coaching, has had a couple stops here, there, and now at Penn State. So, T-Frank, that news becomes official. I'm sure you covered it at some point last week, but just any thoughts on that addition as Penn State continues to build out? And I believe has probably now set its primary assistant coaches, position coaches, whatever you want to call
them. Not necessarily. The thing that I'm curious, and I'm just looking it up right now, this is a young coaching staff. And I say that knowing that he's 32 and I'm 35, and I'm happy that I'm still considered young in coaching years, not in playing years. But that to me is the especially on the offensive side of the ball, you have a lot of coaches that are earlier in their career. You didn't bring in a lot of guys that had like very seasoned resumes with like coached X, Y, and Z to the NFL. Has been a defensive coordinator for offensive coordinator for 32 years. Has been an offensive line coach for 5 decades or whatever it might be. Whatever coaches we're looking for in resume, like these are very young coaches that I don't want to say have things to prove, because I think that discredits what they've done already, but are not the profile of what fans were expecting when they heard all the money thrown around for all of the coaching staff. And that has been something that's really muddied the water here in the conversation about Penn State football, is like, these coaches and what they would command in a salary and what they would command from prestige don't match up with what The administration was talking about how much they had to spend to go get these coaches. But the point here is culture and fit. Because if you've got a coach that you think is the next guy that's going to be great, and you want to have that talent, coaches are talent too. And if you are a talent identifier, and Matt Campbell, James Franklin, they are talent identifiers, not just as player identification, but coaching identification. And so this is part of the evaluation of the coaching evaluation for Matt Campbell, is because he's going back to something that we saw from James Franklin, I think, earlier in his time at Penn State, which was finding these guys that are on their way up, that are part of the next generation of great coaches, and are you correct in that sort of assessment? And so, like, I haven't had a chance to really dive into Huggins' career so far to know where he is on that conversation, but he definitely fits the profile of, like, a young, hungry offensive identity that they have on that side of the ball.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. One other interesting note, staff-wise, is that Jake Landry, who was Iowa State's running backs coach in 2025, joining Matt Campbell's first staff in State College as an analyst on offense. He has a pretty interesting background. While he was a running backs coach in 2025 for Iowa State, he was also an offensive coordinator and position coach at North Dakota State when it won the FCS title. He was the play caller on offense in 2024. He has quarterback coaching experience at Temple. He's worked with the offensive line. So, Matt Campbell goes out and gets himself a long-time running backs coach, and then also brings his most recent one from Iowa State with him to State College in a role that he'll be able to do a little bit of everything to help offensive coordinator Taylor Mauser and this offense. So interesting note there. The most recent analyst hire. Somebody asked in the chat if they're done with the assistant coaches and staff building. So the way the Penn State news release read on Huggins' official announcement, they listed out all of the names we've discussed here pretty endlessly and said that was the staff to date, which tells me that, if you're saying to date, usually that means there's more coming. So we'll have to wait and see.
Where do you think they need to add more? Like. Yeah. So where are you've got this an eye on this closer than I do for sure, and I think probably closer than most people. It doesn't have to be a one-on-one comparison to James Franklin's staff, but generally, where do you think they still need help on them? Where are they identifying assistance they can add to either coaching or support staff that they need to flesh out the administration for this particular program?
Yeah, so I ran the numbers this morning. So James Franklin's full staff list, and let me rephrase that. The list of people listed under James Franklin on the Go Penn State sports website before camp started last year was 54. Now, that's not the entire staff, because some people like Andrew Nelson, for example, was listed in a different part of the directory, despite the fact that he worked directly with the football program. That's just one example. There were others. So, his full staff last year, probably closer to 60, I would guess. And then when you add in all the students, interns, things like that, it goes well over 100. But as we sit here today, the number of people at 10:18 a.m. under Matt Campbell is at 53. So he is pretty obviously darn close to where James Franklin's final staff was at Penn State. So will they add more? They could. They could choose not to. I mean, I think if you look across the list of analysts, they have pretty much every position is covered as it could be. I don't really look, when I look at this rundown and see where James Franklin was utilizing space compared to where Matt Campbell is, there's not maybe as many recruiting staff, at least by definition or title, as what James Franklin had. But that doesn't mean there's not people in different titles who are going to help serve in those roles. So, one thing I will say is that it's interesting if you spend as much time wasting time sometimes until it turns into news, looking at these directories across college football. The different ways people describe the same job is just fascinating to me. And so
that is football. That is exactly what football is, because that's exactly how like playing is. You can have the same play or the same concept, and whatever dialect you're coming from, it could sound like a completely different play. That is exactly what it's like in football. Everyone's got their own name for the same job or same thing.
Yes. And so Matt Campbell and James Franklin certainly a little bit different in that regard. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in terms of adding any more bodies. I mean, I feel like there's probably... Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that's a de-emphasis on... I don't think there's a de-emphasis on recruiting, but I do find that to be striking, where Penn State had such a well-developed recruiting staff. And Matt Campbell and his staff are also well known for their ability to scout and evaluate. And I guess, like, don't mess with the secret sauce here. But when you have this particular... I wonder if that's something that's going to grow over time, or if that is something where they feel confident in their people, and so they don't feel like they need the volume of eyeballs to go find the players that they're looking for. It's a very interesting change there, because recruiting is going to be very important to the staff. Like, it's not going to be a staff that is going to be relying on the transfer portal after this year nearly as much as they are going to be about high school recruiting and evaluation. And I know we focus on the relationship side of that, and I think that's important, but also identifying the talent, finding the guy with the right measurables and the right length and speed that you feel like can develop into a football player that fits your system it takes man hours. Like, there's no way around. I've heard GMs in the NFL say there's no such thing as magic eyeballs that'll tell you yes or no whether this player is going to be great. It takes a lot of time and a lot of reps, and I guess there's going to be people that do higher volume than it is, where was it, Penn State, where they were also doing incredibly high volume. I just don't know how that's going to play out. It's going to be interesting to see.
It will, yeah. And we'll run the numbers once everything is finalized and see how much different, I don't know if the word is emphasis, but just how the two staffs compare. And not that really anyone's going to care how James Franklin's was built. We get told that you guys don't care anymore about his staff and his way of doing things, which I get. But certainly it'll be interesting to look side by side once things are finalized and get a sense of where the resources are being put and so on and so forth. So, but anyway, Savion Huggins is the latest Nittany Lion assistant to become official. And if more pop up in the days ahead, weeks ahead, months ahead, whatever it may be, we'll have you covered with that news over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Speaking of news, T. Frank, we mentioned it at the top of the show, but the American Football Coaches Association convention is wrapped up I believe it's still in Nashville. It might be in Charlotte. I don't remember, but I think it is in Nashville. Either way, it was somewhere over the last couple of days that led to a recruiting dead period where no visitors could come to campus and coaches could not be on the road anywhere but the AFCA convention. So that is now concluded, and the big talking point coming out of that event yesterday was the coaches in the American Football Coaches Association, AFCA, voting to propose to the NCAA Division I Council that they change the redshirt rule from being able to play in up to 4 games during the regular season and still preserve a year of eligibility to being able to play in up to 9 games during the regular season and still preserve a year of eligibility. Now, before the chat gets out of hand, but I will just note this. Everyone, I think, is in agreement that the 5 for 5, you have 5 years to play 5 seasons. And that is that. No waivers, no this, no that. I guess there could still be injury waivers, but it is something that I think college football coaches want to do. I also think, as On3's Andy Staples and others wrote on Tuesday, that they are concerned if they put that in immediately, there will be lawsuits against them for a variety of reasons. So I guess they're going to have to try and somehow, some way phase that in. I'm not sure changing it from 4 games to 9 games really change. I mean, obviously, other than you have more opportunity to play these guys in more games while preserving a year of eligibility, I'm not terribly sure what else it changes. If a guy was going to sit out after his 4th game to preserve that year of eligibility, what's stopping him from doing it after 9?
So I think the interesting thing is, like, I wish they would have done 8, because then it's just flipping it from you can only have 4 to then you can sit out 4. But they went with 9, and it makes sense because, Greg, to me, this is directly tied to the 105 rule, right? So they now are going to need to use every player on the roster to get through a full season if you have attrition, injuries, and things like that, and you don't want to be balancing fighting to keep a player's red shirt if you need him as a depth player. Even to have him active and say there's a situation where he needs to go into a game in the 4th quarter to take reps off of a guy who you don't want starting. Because, again, the NFL has a 53-man roster, and so you have 90% participation in the game plan from 11 starters on both sides of the ball, right? Like, offensive linemen never come out of the game. You rotate defensive linemen, but the secondary in the NFL plays 90% of the snaps. In this situation, you are setting up an NFL model, but you are playing college kids. And so, like, you do need a little bit of depth and flexibility to take some of those reps off if you can. And so I can see how coaches would want this particular rule to say, I want to use all my players for at least 9 games. And that can provide cover for any injury situations better
than if we had only 4 games, and now we're trying to do this math, and suddenly we're burning unnecessary red shirts because we're missing a guy for 2 weeks in the middle of the season, and we need to cover his reps in the game. And so, to me, like, it feels like that. It feels like that's the stepping stone of, okay, you've limited the roster, so now we're going to expand it into usable players. This also puts those young players in a situation where probably they shouldn't be playing, and yet they are. Because 18-year-old freshmen that don't know football, and by the way, football is very simple in its concepts and very complicated in the way it's applied. And so the complicated part is the part it takes time to learn. They're going to be thrust into the fire, and you're going to hate all your freshmen. Hate's a strong word, but you are going to be so displeased with some of these young players when you see them play more and they're not ready, because football is hard. I'm off my soapbox now.
Okay. Well, that's quite all right, T. Frank. It was a good rant, and it's right. It's 100% correct. And so we'll see what happens. Important to remind everyone that the AFCA, while a very powerful lobbying body, for lack of a better word, is not able to create rules by itself. So it can suggest rules, and obviously the fact that this vote was unanimous will send a strong signal to the NCAA about what what head coaches in college football would like, but at the same time, it does not guarantee this rule is going to pass. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out moving forward. I'm not sure when the NCAA Division I Council meets next, but I can't help but to think that if football coaches want this rule to be changed, guess what? Basketball coaches probably want theirs number changed. Wrestling coaches, field hockey coaches, baseball coaches, whatever it might be, probably want their number changed too. So I think there's probably a lot more that will go into the final decision here one way or the other, besides just the head coaches wanting something. They've wanted stuff in the past coming out of this AFCA convention and have not always either got it right away or got it at all. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But certainly a newsworthy nugget to keep in mind. But again, don't read it or take it as concrete, rock solid, done deal, because it certainly is anything but at this moment in time.
Yeah, and I do think it's necessary, given the parameters we just talked about of how the sport is changing and how scholarships and roster limits are changing. I do think it's necessary, and we're going to find out if they get it passed and if all of this changes, because all of this is leading towards there's too. I don't want to get into this, but like unionization, standardization, players being employees. The things that solve a lot of the transfer portal problems are the stuff that the NCAA is unwilling to do, and that you're having a hard time managing from some of these legalistic ways. Like, these are all Band-Aids. These are all Band-Aids towards a final solution, which happens if they can actually implement the changes necessary to make this sport actually make any sense. And until then, we're just going to muddle through.
No, that's 100% correct. It is yet another attempt, one of many during the long history of this sport, to basically try and circumvent the process of collective bargaining, making the players employees and treating them like that. And so, to your point, yeah, this may help. This may be a temporary fix for 2026, but certainly, it is only temporary. I guess is probably the best way to put it. We could very soon find ourselves back in this very same situation with someone actually talking to On3's Andy Staples and some others down at the convention. Told reporters that the calendar was not discussed, which does not shock me because, again, the AFCA cannot make these changes, these rules by themselves, and to try and get one organization to offer a collective solution to something that is such a complex problem was never going to happen. So I don't believe for a second there was no conversation about it. There was just no unanimous and quite possibly majority statement for them to put out there about it. I could feel pretty confident about that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, T. Frank, let's move on to the next part of today's BWI Live. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel from BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. In roughly 2 days and some odd number of hours, minutes, and seconds, the transfer portal will officially close for everyone but the finalist in the college football playoff. So Friday at 11:59 p.m. is the deadline to enter the transfer portal. It is important to note that you'll see, I'm sure, a couple guys go in over the weekend. Why is that the case? Compliance offices have 48 hours to put the paperwork in once receiving a request. So they do not have to stay up till 11:59 p.m. on Friday night waiting for any last second paperwork to come in. They can wake up and deal with it Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon, whatever it may be. So I think you might still see a couple guys go in over the weekend. But generally speaking, by the time we get up Saturday morning, or certainly if you're still awake into the midnight hour, the 1 o'clock hour, as Friday passes into Saturday, you should feel pretty good that things are finalized for Penn State. And so it will obviously continue to look to add players with the spring semester underway. It's not running out of time to do that. I think it has a little bit more wiggle room than we realize, but certainly it's going to have to get that done sooner rather than later if anybody wants to be here for spring practice, which, considering all the newness, T. Frank, if you're not here for spring practice, you are putting yourself pretty far behind the curve in terms of having to wait to get to Penn State until at the very earliest May, once you miss out on the spring opportunity to enroll, and maybe in some cases even the summer at some point.
Yeah, so you go into the portal and you're in the portal. You can come out of the portal if a team wants you, right? Like, that's also part of the conversation. Am I correct in that? Yeah, okay. So, like, it doesn't have to be the end of player acquisition for Penn State, but it probably is because, like, if they wanted a player, they would take a player. It's going to be interesting to see, like, how this next part of the conversation goes that I want to get to, which is the biggest wins that haven't announced what they're doing via the transfer portal. And I think this is an interesting conversation because, like, why haven't they said anything? Because it could be as simple as they don't need to because they just have decided to come back and they didn't feel like making an announcement. Or in another situation, maybe they have very public feelers out there with an agent or something like that, but they don't want to lose their spot by officially entering the portal and then not having a place to come home to. So I think that's, there's a couple of different ways you could read this and why you would have maybe guys going in at the very last second if they know their options and they're still weighing whether or not they want to stay at Penn State or if they want to go and have that, go to that other option. But obviously the musical chairs are about over, Greg. Like, a lot of these spots are taken by players who already went in the portal and have already gone to other teams. So that is why there's still a little bit of ambiguity in my mind about guys who haven't made their decision. And I just wanted to go through these players and see which ones you thought would be the biggest win for Penn State to have this, like, okay, this guy is going to be back for next year. We're not going to presume it. It actually is going to be back next year. And so it's basically getting a player out of the portal from your own roster in a certain sense. This retention effort, when finalized, is like adding a player. And so I wanted to get your thought on this. Who do you think would be the biggest win for Penn State out of the portal? Or out of the roster retention?
Yeah, so at this point, we're down to 18 members of the 2025 Penn State roster who have not yet made a announcement one way or the other about whether they would be returning to Penn State in 2026 or leaving the Nittany Lions via the transfer portal. So at this point, the list is obviously small to pick from. And so, there's one name that everyone would settle on at this point. But we don't like to just pick the same guy. That would be boring. So I'm going to go with receiver Lyric Samuel. The only touchdown reception, the only guy with a touchdown reception in last year's blue-white game, came into Penn State as a Rivals industry ranking 3-star recruit. And my rationale here for picking him is I don't know if he's ever going to crack the rotation, T. Frank. I don't know if he's ever going to be a rotational guy at best, a depth guy at best, or something more. I'm not sure. But I think if you're Matt Campbell and if you're Noah Pauley and if you're Taylor Mauser, you want to find out. You want to see what this kid might be capable of while also keeping some order to your depth chart in terms of eligibility. So, you look at what Iowa State players transferred to Penn State at the receiver spot. There were some younger guys in that mix. There's also a fair number of older guys. So, you're using you're using a little bit of you're keeping rather. Let me rephrase that. You're keeping with Samuel. A little bit more of your balance from an eligibility and from a class tracking perspective. So obviously that's always a preferred thing. It's never it's never easy to do or perfect to do. I think he's a guy you can point to, assuming he ends up staying with Penn State, which the indication at this point is that he will, as a guy who will have a chance to make some noise this year as his receiver room yet again completely resets.
Yeah, and there's opportunity for him to do so. I think he's staying. This is just purely my opinion and prognostication. There's no sourcing or anything like this, and I'll show you my evidence here. It is very simple. 6'4". I don't know if you can see this here. I'm going to point it to on my screen. Okay, my mouse is invisible. 6'4", 185. This guy is a Iowa State, Penn State build receiver. He's a vertical stretch guy with good speed for his size, and somebody who can high point the ball and had really good hands. There was a lot of stuff that we didn't know about Lyric Samuel, where he came from in high school and what he produced in his first season, especially going back and looking at the blue-white game. It was just that he just needed to physically develop and learn the position a little bit better. The markers of what he could be in this offense as an X receiver is what they need and what they're looking for. So if you look at the depth chart, it is very thin at certain positions. And I know, I feel like you gave me the one you thought I wanted, but this is the one I wanted. We both picked different guys to have a different conversation. And my pick in a second, I do think is also valuable in this conversation of the roster and the needs. But Lyric Samuel fits what they want out of the receivers that they've recruited. Look at all the receivers they looked at in the portal. 6'4", 6'3", 6'4", 6'3", 6'2". All these guys are big, wide-framed, explosive athletes. And Lyric Samuel fits there. And I think it makes sense that maybe he just doesn't want to make an announcement. Because here's the other thing, Greg. If you make an announcement and then you go back on your word and enter the portal because you get an offer, then you are you look silly, like Tysier Denmark or Dejan Lane. And so Lyric Samuel, again, I'm just going to read the room. Lyric Samuel made a post about how he felt like and the receiver room let Marcus Hagans down. And Marcus Hagans was let go of his job. He's okay because he's now the Michigan wide receiver coach.
Right.
But did Lyric Samuel want to follow him to Michigan? Is that in the works? I'm asking questions. I'm not making accusations. These are some of the factors that might be part of that conversation, but it is a good retention for him to be on the roster, for my opinion. LeVar Arrington II, I know everyone loves the name, but also I think the game actually fits this defense better. I talked about this on the show yesterday. They're going to go back to a base 4-3 defense, which means that their defensive philosophy includes that third linebacker, whereas previously, I even asked James Franklin this, what's the difference if you're going to play 90% nickel, whether you're a base defense in a 4-3 or a 4-2? And basically he said it's semantics, but the semantics here are that you're agreeing, you are acknowledging when you play a 4-2 or you play a 3-safety defense, you're not going to play certain fronts. You're not going to do certain things up, to the line of scrimmage, to the offensive line, to give them complicated looks. This defense under D'Anton Lynn does do that. If you want to be multiple and you want to blur the lines between odd fronts and even fronts and give the offense really hard concepts to figure out pre-snap, you need to have linebackers and you need to have tweeners. And so LeVar Arrington is both of those things. He is 6'2", I think, and has super long arms. He's a pass rusher specialist in high school. He's going to develop physically at a certain point to get to a positional. Look at the genetics we're talking about here. This is. And I haven't gone back to actually look at this, but I'm fairly certain of what I've learned about football. This is the position his dad played at Penn State. So, it makes a lot of sense for him to be the number 2 Sam linebacker and to play a hybrid role as a guy who can cover, but also is going to be a pass rusher and a guy who is eating up snaps, trying to get after the quarterback as a tweener, as a linebacker first, but a guy who's going to be standing up on the edge as an outside linebacker by alignment. Now, by position and by how the offense would read him, he would probably be at a certain point. You would view him as a linebacker, but that's what you need out of this defensive roster. And LeVar Arrington, I think, fits really well to allow that flexibility of moving Caleb Bacon between the Will and the Sam linebacker position to give them more depth in the box as well, which is what he did at Iowa State. So there's a lot of kind of complex stuff that I'm trying to skim over the top to really make this understandable. But that hybrid position is back in the defense, and you need guys that can do that. And Arrington is a perfect prototype for that. He's exactly what you want, and he can have a role this year as a redshirt freshman in that particular context.
Yes, and so he was an easy pick for this one. Samuel, another easy pick. Some other guys on that list, too, that we'll wait and see if anything changes with their status as we get toward the end of the week. But 2 easy picks, without question, for some wins for Matt Campbell and co. of guys who have not yet made their announcement yet. So far, at this point, not indicated they are leaving, which means they are staying, of course, until we hear otherwise. So that's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel. It's the BWI Live Show for Wednesday, January 14th. Don't forget, you can join Blue White Illustrated for the latest transfer portal intel, recruiting news as junior days ramp up here at the end of the month, and coaches hit the road for 50% off with the transfer portal special. The Ultimate Fan Bundle gets you access to Blue White Illustrated, On 3, and Rivals, the national teams, the message boards, and also a full year of access to The Athletic. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, 50% off transfer portal special continues. We hope you'll check us out over there and appreciate you all checking us out either on YouTube or the podcast feed of your choice. T. Frank, let's get into our next topic of the day.
One second.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Like the video, subscribe here to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Make sure that you're helping us grow the audience so we get to more information, to more people, and we can have a conversation about Penn State football. This has been a really enjoyable show, Greg, and that's why I wanted to throw this in, because like the first half of the show was not at all what we were thinking we were going to talk about, and I think we had a really great conversation about kind of the context of the situation we're in. And I feel like because of your expertise and the expertise of the people that we have here on the show, Greg, Ryan, and Nate, we have great conversations here that make people smarter. And I want more people to be smarter about Penn State football, because I feel like that's a good thing. Information is always, more good information is always better. And that's what I would like to bring to the world. So please help us do that with the like button, subscribe. It is a daily task, because the almighty algorithm does not keep in mind that, like, hey, people like this. Like, you have to keep reminding it then in the engagement and all that stuff. So sorry, I just wanted, that was the moment for us to talk about all of the stuff that isn't football and get in the plugs. So I wanted to make sure we got to that.
Like and subscribe. Thank you all for doing that. T. Frank and I will appreciate you for it. All right, let's get into the title portion of today's show. The final portal checklist. What's left as Penn State goes down into the final days and hours of the transfer portal window. Again, important to note, I've been asked this more frequently over the last couple of days than earlier this month. But reminder, Penn State players or any other college football player does not need to make a decision on his next school by the time the deadline passes on Friday at 11:59 p.m. He must simply have declared his interest in entering the transfer portal by then and be in the transfer portal by then, or that 48-hour compliance paperwork window. But they don't have to decide. The deadline for a lot of these guys, quite frankly, is much more related to where they could go next and that school's academic calendar. So you will see decisions throughout the rest of the month. You'll see visits throughout the rest of the month. Obviously, some schools start their semesters later than Penn State does. And so you'll see schools adding guys later than Penn State will. And you might say to yourself, well, how were they able to do that? It's because their academic calendars for the spring semester starts later than Penn State's does. Anyway, we're going to break it down. We each ranked our top needs left in this portal window for Penn State. So we'll start with number 3.
Number 3.
Lead us off, T. Frank. What do you got? Number 3 on your list of biggest needs left for Penn State in the transfer portal at this time.
Yeah, and the answer might already be on the roster, because they have a glut of players that I would consider safeties or nickels, but outside cornerback depth to me is the area where you want to have 4. Not that all 4 are going to play the same amount, but generally, like, teams like to have 4 corners they feel can play. And we saw Darius Dixon, his role grew last year. They have 3 guys, and then there is a huge cliff in experience and familiarity and all those things. So are they going to borrow somebody from the nickel position? Is like Zion Tracy going to be emergency cornerback 4 for the outside? Jonathan Cooper played outside. I know they want him to play safety, but like in certain situations, certain defenses, I could see them wanting to use him as a zone corner or a boundary corner on the outside. Like, he is athletic enough, he is fast enough to do it. I don't know that would be a good plan, especially in a defense that isn't zone-centric. I think they're going to want to play more man coverage based on the fact they brought back all of their corners from 2025. So outside cornerback depth, there might be guys that have the flexibility Ibn McDaniels is a guy that has the size and would look like a prototypical outside corner, and he played nickel for Syracuse. Played everywhere, but he played nickel. That might be the answer. But at this point, like, I don't necessarily know. So to me, there's a hole on the roster without that information. I don't know they're getting it from the portal, but I do think that's a thing they have to address from somewhere to find out who's the guy, who's the body, who's the guy that has future availability at the position as well.
Yeah. One quick note from the chat, T. Frank. John asked if a Penn State player declares to join the portal on Friday, can that player still decide to come back, or are they gone for good? It would just depend on what the conversation was between that player and his agent and Matt Campbell and his staff, and sort of where both sides were at that point in time. You know, we knew what James Franklin's policy was pretty much once you hit the portal, and unless it was a special case, you were almost certainly gone. We don't necessarily know what Matt Campbell's feeling is on that. And I think it's also important to realize that that feeling is it's not a static, it's a fluid feeling in a lot of cases, because you're trying to build out a roster. You're trying to set a depth chart. You have a lot of new faces and changing parts and things like that in the first year of his time in Penn State. So how he approaches that this year and how he approaches it next year might be two entirely different things. So, I mean, I would say depending on who that player is, there's certainly a chance they would come back. But also, I think there's maybe not as simple of a reality as I'd like to make it, but if you waited until the final day of the portal being open to go into the portal, I just have a hard time believing your plan was to stick at Penn State. Like, to me, something would have changed that changed your mind, that is now going to force you or lead you to look elsewhere. So
yeah,
that's sort of where I stand on that. My position group to start with here, I'm going to go to the quarterback room. So you look at this Penn State quarterback room. Obviously, the Nittany Lions have added Rocco Beck, and they have added Alex Mansk from Iowa State. They have Peyton Falzone and Case Evans coming in. But, you know, and Jack Lambert returns, the walk-on quarterback as well. But, you know, if you can add a older, more experienced passer, and those are hard to find, especially when they know they're not going to play in all likelihood. You know, can you do that? And so this is one of those ones where I think it's a reasonable spot to put at number 3 on the list. But if you were asking me to rank them in terms of the most likely future additions, if there are any for Penn State out of the portal, it'd be lower on the list, just simply because it's going to be hard to convince somebody with playing experience to come be the backup at Penn State over, you know, potentially going somewhere even at a lower level and being the starter.
Yeah, and the guy, it's a difficult needle to thread, because what you're looking for is somebody where if something happens, they can step in and play. So that person might have starting options elsewhere, as you just said, but they aren't a guy that has obvious starting options. So then, like, are they a QB of the quality and caliber that can play at this level? And so you get into a really gray area about what that quarterback is, because everyone says, yeah, just get Chase Daniel of college football. And it's like, well, TJ Finley's still looking for starting jobs. Like, he's going to Incarnate Word so he can play. I don't know that I just don't know how you do it. I think they're going to try, but it is one of those situations where they wanted Ethan Grunkmeyer to be this guy. And Ethan Grunkmeyer, to answer one of the questions in the portal, has Grunk committed anywhere yet? The projection is that he is going to go to Virginia Tech, although I don't know that I've seen that it's official, Greg. I believe that
you are correct.
Yeah, so that is the kind of, like, everyone's going to go, oh boy, because they also brought in Bryce Baker from North Carolina, who we talked about on the recruiting show last year, is a really good quarterback prospect who left North Carolina after all that happened that last season. He's now at Virginia Tech. And Grunk is, I don't know, you know, like, would he be the starter there? And so is he weighing his options still, or is he committed and just the paperwork isn't in? That's the part where we don't know. And, you know, it's just a curious and interesting situation.
So important to remember that classes, as we talked about earlier, do not start at the same time at every school. So Penn State started classes this past Monday for the spring semester. Virginia Tech does not start until next Monday. So maybe if you're Ethan Grunkemeyer, you just are waiting this out a little bit longer to see what happens at Oregon, to see what happens at, you know, today's the NFL draft early. Let me rephrase that. The declaration deadline for players who are underclassmen to declare for the NFL draft is today. So Dante Moore is the one everyone's watching, the Oregon quarterback.
Yeah.
And obviously, Dylan Raiola from Nebraska is already transferring into Oregon before knowing at least the public outcome of that situation. But maybe if you're Grunkemeyer, you're just saying, yeah, coach, I'm probably coming to you, but I'm going to keep my options open and see what happens with these other schools and QB situations before officially locking myself in when I have until Monday, January 20th, till classes start. So at any rate, yeah.
Can I just, it is an interesting situation because he left because he wanted to play, right? Because if he wanted to be a backup at a situation or he wanted to compete for a position, he could have done that at Penn State. Like, I know that Rocco Becht is the starting quarterback, and there's not any question about that. But if he goes to Virginia Tech and loses to Bryce Baker, like, then he's in the exact same position. And, like, where did you want to be? Because you didn't want to be a backup, but if you're going to be a backup somewhere, where did you want to be? And it is very interesting that he's in this position right now that other schools and programs didn't jump at the opportunity to find what they perceived as a starting quarterback. I think he's got the ability to be a starting quarterback in the Power 5 level. You know, a kid from Ohio, Cincinnati. I don't know. This is the thing, is I don't know Cincinnati or some of the Midwest schools. I don't know their quarterback situation. But I think Grunk is a very talented player and is a guy who has a lot of upside. And so it's just curious where I think maybe he locked in with Virginia Tech early and then they signed in the second quarterback and it created some muddy water. And it's really, maybe he's that, like I said, maybe he's already there. Maybe he's fine with the competition. He thinks he's going to win it, whatever. It is a very interesting situation, though. Like, that it was not as clean of a, oh, there goes Gronk, he's going to be a starter at X school. And I thought that would be the case. And that hasn't played out.
All right, let's get to number 2 on our list of things Penn State could still add in the portal.
Number 2.
T. Frank, take it away, buddy. What's number 2 on your list?
Yeah, O-line depth. And I think they brought over some really talented players from Iowa State. I actually had a chance to sit down and look at some of their high school film, and some of these players are very talented. So I don't know that this is a very difficult needle to thread of you need to find a couple of players that can be quality depth backups / players for the future that if they needed to play this year, they could, but primarily they are a developmental prospect that does, some redshirt sophomores to throw into the lineup. I know everyone's pointing at left tackle, but you didn't, and I'm assuming they prioritized monetarily as well, retaining those tackles. They retained 4 offensive tackles here. So one of them is going to start at left tackle. And I don't think they're going to be going out to get Jordan Seaton, or I don't think they're going to go get an obvious star starting left tackle. I would be shocked by that. Especially when I think they've got future stars on the roster, and it's whether or not you think they can be a star in August of this year. But O-line depth at guard, I think, is a part of the conversation, and maybe one more tackle in general. And they might have a tackle on the roster they like that I see as a guard, somebody who's 6'5", tweener traits. But it feels like one more piece there would make sense. And I think they're in a good position. It's just there's a lot of unproven talent there. There's a lot of projection of guys who haven't ever started before, and they all have to come together and be a starting offensive line unit this year. And that's going to be tricky, but the talent and the starting 5 or 6, I'm very encouraged by the body types, the size, and the abilities. I think you'd like 1 or 2 more.
Yeah, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on my number 2 because it was special teams depth. And as we started the show, Penn State is
a lot of good
that with a touchback specialist out of James Madison, Christian Rosa. So I obviously don't need to spend a lot of time there. I'd assume they're done at that spot. Though, you never know. Maybe some gunner type guys, depending on what ends up being in the portal, you could possibly find. But just to clarify one thing in the chat before we get to what's number 1 on our list, Drew Aller does not need to declare for the NFL draft because he is out of eligibility. And so he is automatically declared for the NFL draft. He spoke with reporters back in November and said that he briefly looked into the idea of trying to get basically a medical redshirt for another season, and that it was not going to go anywhere, and it was not because he played that far into the season. And so there's no medical waiver coming for him. He is going to be off to the NFL and doesn't need to say anything about doing so.
Yeah, that's just been kind of an idea left out there for, it was, I guess, as you mentioned, it was kind of brought up as a possibility. I like that you have, like, what are their needs? And so far you've got backup quarterback that you hope never plays and special teams depth. Pretty good. They're in a pretty good spot for Greg here on this list of needs to address.
All right, let's get to number 1.
Number 1.
T. Frank, as the chat has been telling us throughout the course of this conversation, there was no other landing spot but for looking at the defensive line moving into the final part of the portal window and any other acquisitions Penn State might make. They have done some work there without question, but just a lot of turnover there. And at this point, you just need some more bodies, I think, up front. So take that away. I'll let you run with it.
I think the main thing too much think in there. The main thing they still need is pass rushing assets. And again, Caleb Bacon, LeVar Arrington are part of this conversation as hybrid linebackers that have pass rushing and blitzing skills. So I might be overstating this, but if you look at the defensive end and defensive tackle recruiting, they were interested in guys that had more pass rushing traits on the interior, and they did not get any of those players. 2 of them went to Minnesota, 1 of them went to Indiana. And they would fit into this defense. Those 3 players would have a role, but they opted for bigger physical bodies on the interior, and they opted for more power rushers on the edge, which makes sense why some of Penn State's young defensive linemen decided to leave for the transfer portal if they don't feel like they fit into that prototype. 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", bigger, more physically imposing defensive linemen. But then you've got guys that can be hybrids. And, we've talked about in terms of pure pass rushing traits, it's Max Granville at defensive end. And so, like, if you wanted one bona fide pass rushing defensive end that could go along with him, and now you feel like you've got 5 defensive ends that have various skills, that's the number one thing I feel like they tried to get, or they wanted to get, and they didn't quite get in the transfer portal, was more pass rushing assets up front on the defensive line, either at tackle or end. And to me, like, end is the place where if you were going to splash money and you wanted one player out of the transfer portal that you were going to spend on, and like, this is our one piece away sort of build piece, it would be defensive end. Just to have, because Dan Lynn loves his defensive ends. He will play 3 of them on plays. He will play 4 of them on third down if he can. And so, to me, that would be the area I think that they absolutely need. Bodies is one thing, but it's what those bodies can do, because they got a lot of the same right now up front in terms of run defense and power being the main characteristics of these players.
Yeah, no, I don't have too much more to add other than we'll see if that kind of player or players exist at this point in the transfer portal. Certainly they will continue evaluating and looking for guys and quote-unquote diamond in the roughs and things like that, but a lot of your, I guess you would say, higher-end players that do the things you're talking about are already accounted for, either coming to Penn State already or going elsewhere. So we'll see. But that's anyway, that's a wrap on our look at Penn State's biggest portal needs left as the portal winds down. Now it's time for best bets. All right, best bets time, powered by BetMGM. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code ON3 and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code ON3. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use bonus code ON3. That's the letter O, the letter N, the number 3 when you sign up. ON3. Make this college football season one for the history books. Make it legendary, and there's a pro football no sweat and odds boost token out there right now. Pro football playoffs are here, and BetMGM is giving you 2 ways to make every snap even bigger. The odds boost token, you can activate it on any pro football playoff bet, and if your pick hits, you're looking at an even bigger payout. Simple as that. And if you want a little extra peace of mind, you You'll grab the no sweat token, attach it to a qualifying bet, and if things don't go your way, you'll get your stake back in bonus bets. So there's no sweat, literally. So lock in, settle in, and get ready. BetMGM has your back every step of the playoffs. Let's start there. A game you could use your no sweat or odds boost token on. I'm going to go to the NFL divisional round Sunday, 6:30 p.m. The Bears take on the Rams. I'm going to take the Bears plus 3.5. T. Frank, I liked watching them against the Packers, and I know that was a crazy game, and the Packers never should have lost. But sometimes you find a way to win a game you have no business winning and then continue doing that throughout the playoffs. And this Rams team is super talented, obviously was pushed a good bit by Carolina. So, I can certainly understand why people would want nothing to do with this play. But for some reason, the Bears just jumped off the page to me, and they get to host the Rams Sunday evening in Chicago, and it'll be interesting to watch it play out. But give me the points, Bears plus 3.5.
Interesting. I don't know as much about the Bears as their defense specifically as I would like, but I know just from some friends that their secondary isn't very. I think their secondary isn't very good, or I might have that backwards. Their run defense might not be that great. So like they have some weaknesses that the Rams offense could take advantage of, and then on the flip side, the Rams secondary is bad. I do know that the number of explosive plays they've given up, the ability to get downfield, and you put Caleb Williams out there with the opportunity to put stress on the secondary by extending plays and being maniac with the football. You talked me into it. I think that this has some legs to me.
All right, next one, going to the College Football Playoff Championship game next Monday, 7:30 p.m. I am taking the underdog again. Give me Miami plus 8.5 at BetMGM over Indiana. I do think Indiana wins this game, T. Frank, but I think the Hurricanes can keep it within a touchdown. There's just something about that Miami team that it's hard not to look at them and feel like they'll keep, this is a field goal game to maybe a touchdown game. Either way, you're giving me 8.5. So I can even get into some screwy 2-point conversion math situations and still find myself on the right side of this. So I think it's going to be a close game. Indiana is obviously tremendous and is a big favorite for a reason. I just feel like this game's going to be closer than the 8.5 points suggest. So I will take the Hurricanes and the 8.5 next Monday night.
1 second. I have to this is my counter evidence to you, and it is just this. One moment. We have a visual presentation coming up.
Yes.
That's my only pushback is just the Kirk Cignetti meme. I would like
Fair
you to
enough.
respond to betting against Kirk Cignetti.
Yes, he's just staring directly into my soul, as he does to anyone who talks about his team in a way that is not as positive or as affirmative as he would like. So at any rate, we will go with Miami plus 8.5, and I will deal with staring Kurt Cignetti at some point down the road. And then last one for me, I'm going to go to an area Penn State fans should know well. Tonight's men's basketball game, the Nittany Lions host UCLA at the Bryce Jordan Center, and I will say that game is I think it's at 8:30 tonight on Fox Sports 1. I'm going to take the over 151.5 points. It just feels like a game to me that gets into the high 70s, even maybe the low 80s, and that would get the job done for me and for the number at BetMGM. So over 151.5 on tonight's Penn State UCLA game. And those are our three best bets. I won't make you have any input or thought on the Penn State basketball over. You have enough going on with having to get over the wrestling today. So that's today's best bets from BetMGM.
See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, and 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer now for new customers only. Subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are not withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 7 days. In partnership with Kansas Crossings Casino and Hotel.
All right. Thanks, BetMGM. Thank you all for joining us on this edition of the BWI Live Show. Any final thoughts, T. Frank?
No, I'm just glad you didn't make me talk about basketball, especially college basketball. I don't know anything about basketball, so I appreciate that.
Well, you do know about wrestling. You will be over at Cale Sanderson's press conference today. The number one Nittany Lions take on Iowa in an always fun dual meet this Friday night in Iowa City. Then they go to Northwestern on Sunday. So make sure you check back to the YouTube channel for that news conference from Cale Sanderson later today and our continuing coverage of Penn State wrestling throughout the rest of the week and weekend. The guys are back on Thursday with the BWI Live recruiting show. Sean Fitz and Ryan Snyder will join T. Frank to offer the latest insight and intel on recruiting as coaches plan to hit the road while also navigating the rest of the portal. So don't forget to hit like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Check us out at bluewhiteillustrated.com. We'll catch you next time. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel.